And actually, now I want to bring up the next graph too, which is the analysis that you do of what pitch mix he kind of defaulted to last season versus what might be a more optimal pitch mix. And I'm going to put that up on the board right now. And you can see the graphs on the one side is versus left-handed batters and the other side is versus right-handed batters. Obviously a very important bifurcation here is right-handed pitchers will be pitching differently to the different sides of the plate. And so what did you find when you ran the analysis for the suggested pitch mix post giving him Carlos Vargas' slide?
Yeah, so as you can see, there are some deviations from what he actually did. And a lot of that goes, I think there's a lot that goes into the differences that you see, comparing what they actually did to what this process suggests that they should do. And I'll offer a little caveat that this is merely a suggestion that exists in this hypothetical simulation world that I built out, right? And that in actuality, perhaps it doesn't work. But to me, this offers a different perspective as to how pitchers could go about deploying the pitches that they have and so on and so forth.
Right.
And I'll sort of take this opportunity to jump into two pieces of work that really inspired what I did. And I mentioned them early on in the blog post. So Stephen Sutton Brown from Baseball Prospectus, and then a handful of guys from Driveline Baseball. They independently did research projects trying to quantify what makes an arsenal, right? So like, how do we know that all these pitches that Shane Smith has, that they work well together, that they're allowing for the success of Shane Smith to occur, or some struggles to occur? And they both of them more or less introduce similar ideas. And there's sort of two buckets of thought here that they're offering in terms of arsenals, and then I'll tie it together here with what we're seeing to make a little bit more sense and give a practical example.
Love it.
But they bring up the concept of mixing, which would be having pitches that have different movement profiles and velocities than each other, right? So you're not just throwing three different variants of the same sort of fastball in the same sort of movement profile. You've got a little bit of variance, and you're sort of moving around those pitch profile graphics that you'll see on Baseball Savant. And then the second one would be matching. So that, again, similar to what you mentioned before with tunneling, they introduced the concept of you want pitches to look like each other as long as possible in flight to the batter, right? So that it's difficult to tell what's going on. So then if you've got pitches that are able to mimic each other very far along in flight and then move differently, then that is very advantageous for the pitcher and becomes very difficult for the batters to even guess what's coming their way.
Right. Even if they're kind of on it, they're not on it necessarily, because they got to make a 50-50 or 33% guess as they're in the middle of a swing decision. Yeah, it'd be very difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, tying this back into what we see here, these plots, I think, do a good job of playing into the concepts that those two groups talk about. And good example would be if you were looking at Shane Smith's movement plot on Baseball Savant, I think this would start to make a little bit more sense, where if we look at the four-seam fastball and the sinker, they sort of operate in a similar area of the movement profile plot, meaning they probably look, and on top of that, they have very similar velocities. I believe they are basically the same, actually, according to Baseball Savant from last year, both at 95.7 miles an hour. So your pitches that look like each other and are moving at the same rate of speed, but then slightly deviate a little bit. So you would think that playing into your four-seam fastball and your sinker a little bit off of each other could help. And what's interesting with the idea of the slider being sort of suggested to be used more, especially against right-handed pitchers, is that I think it leans into that mix element that, again, Sutton Brown and Driveline bring up, where you're stretching that movement profile and you're forcing batters to account for a different speed, a different movement, and that causes a little bit more trouble. And then especially if you also look at the mix against the lefties with working in the sweeper, which he really didn't throw very often.
I was going to say, for people looking at the graph on the screen, the the circles that are blank are what he actually threw.
Yes.
And then the colored circles are the suggested amount. So you could see the sweeper up to 15% against left-handed batters when he nominally threw it. I mean, maybe he threw it 10 times all year or whatever. It doesn't look like much.
I think it was less, but that's where this process sort of leaves what actually happened behind and says, what if we sort of reimagine this and see what comes out of this? And the way that I landed on these percentages was this mix actually outperformed what he actually did within my modeling process. So that's how this ended up here. If, like we'll get to later, if somebody has a pitch mix that does not outperform what they actually did, then there's no suggestion. And we say you've probably landed in a pretty good spot with how you're deploying.
Yeah, I look forward to talking about that guy later in the discussion. One thing I wanted to point out here, maybe it's 2 points here necessarily, Sean, is like when you're looking at the graph, the most obvious thing to me is not so much like an increase in slider usage, although there is a decent sized one both against both handedness, but it's the substantial decrease in the four seam fastball. And now Shane Smith, his best pitch was a four seam fastball, and he leaned on it a very lot. So I guess my question here is, Sean, how much of this is just like comfortability for a particular pitcher of like, I know that pitch is working today. I've got that one in my bag today, and so I'm going to lean on this one more. Or how much of it is sometimes like I look at the graphs here for pitch mix, suggested pitch mix, and to me it reminds me of like game theory optimal poker. And now game theory optimal poker is good when you're against world-class athletes. But if you're against some very poor players, you will want to deviate from that and play a more exploitive, type of game. And so where does that land with regards to like an average pitcher's pitch mix? Do you think it's a lot more like just leaning on the thing they know they can trust? Or are they seeing something individually out there specifically that that's why they're choosing to go back to the well so much?
You know, as a non-former Major League Baseball player, I can certainly speak to this with full confidence. But I imagine it's a little bit of it all, right?
Yeah, right.
Guys are going to go with what they're comfortable with. And ideally or hypothetically, the team also has like a game plan, right, on how they want to attack certain batters. And maybe that sort of deviates from what you want to do or what you should do the most. But I would offer that, to me, this work here with suggesting optimal mixes is meant to sort of challenge the status quo.